afternoon, everybody. I would like to welcome you back after the coffee break. I'm happy to see that you are still here because it's been a long day. Some of you had an interesting evening last night as well. My name is Koechlin. I teach at the Institute of Social Anthropology at the Centre of African Studies here in Basel, and I have been given the honour to facilitate the panel with the presenters, and I'm very, very happy to do that. Just before we start, as a good academic, I would like to issue a little criticism of the title of this final panel. If you look at the programme, you will see, I think it's called The Gap Between Pretense and Reality. And I think if we've learnt one thing from today is that what you and I already call pretense actually creates very powerful realities. And of course, for instance, the denial of xenophobia in South Africa is probably one such case in point, and a very disturbing one as such. And I would just like to draw your attention to maybe a little more harmless one. But I mean, we are in Switzerland. And in a way, this was also about the discussion of the problems or the pretenses and the realities created here in Switzerland. And only a year ago, there was an initiative. As you know, Switzerland is a very strong democracy, and there was a popular initiative which was accepted by the people of Switzerland against mass immigration. Now, that in itself implies that there is something, such a thing as mass immigration in Switzerland. Now, this may be a pretense, but it has created a very powerful reality because the people have accepted it, and the whole machinery which we were hearing about earlier is now being put in place in one way or another. There is another pretense there because, I mean, in Switzerland, not by the widest stretch of imagination, can you say that xenophobia is caused by deprivation and poverty. I think that is really a fundamental difference between Switzerland and South Africa, and I think it needs to be stated as well. But there is something where we obviously have some kind of imagination about our society, where this idea of mass immigration, you know, that implies that we are somehow uncontaminated by immigrants, by foreign influences. And what was very interesting, we were talking about football in the break, in social media, around about the time when we were voting on this initiative of mass immigration, they showed a picture of the Swiss national football team where all the players had been photoshopped out that had had Swiss citizenship for less than I think 1 or 2 generations, and there were 3 players left. So that just gives you an idea that, of course, this idea we have about ourselves is, you know, falsified in many ways. It's a pretense, but it has powerful realities. And of course, there's a lot of political capital that can be made with it. But I would actually like to turn all our attention to our speakers. And in the first round, I would just like to actually ask you some questions individually. And I would like to stick to the order of the programme too. So I would actually like to start with Sindi. Because I think one of the other differences, if I just may highlight some of the differences between South Africa and Switzerland, is the level and the extent of violence that immigrants experience in everyday life, and the way that it is politicised as well. One thing that struck me very much as you were talking about your work within the organisation, with the communities, but also the confrontations that you have with the police, is this level of violence that you experience on a daily basis, certainly in your work, but also the people that you are working with. I mean, you said something very strong. You said you cannot control the people's anger. And you were talking actually about the people who were perpetrating the violence against immigrants. But I was wondering, what about the anger of the immigrants? What about the anger of the people whom you are trying to protect, whom you are trying to work with? How do you overcome that? How do you overcome the, this experience of violence, the fear that it creates, but also the anger that it creates?
Good afternoon again, everybody. Yes, Lucy's brought up the question that says that how do we protect the anger of the immigrants in South Africa? As I said earlier on, that we cannot protect we cannot protect the anger of the people that are the ones that condemning the immigration. The way that we as the movement doing, we go in these people, in the immigrants, join them. We don't distance ourselves to show the support, our support to them, and that is how we calm the situation when it comes to seeing that our people in our society are the ones who are condemning this violence. So by supporting them, working together with them, issue press statements, giving them a full support, visiting them in the camps where they are kept in as a safe homes, is the way that we're calming them in the situation they overcome in South Africa.
Thank you very much, Sindi. Well, I would like to move on to Mervyn, because I'd like to do this first round asking individual questions. Now, what struck me very much with your talk is the way that you were speaking about space and about this idea of belonging, and especially about this idea of imagining spaces of belonging where actually everybody is respected, where everybody has their space together. And I was wondering whether you could say a little more about what imaginations you've come up with, because obviously in your daily work you're working in these round tables, all the other instruments that you laid out, but what are these ideas? Also drawing on what we've just been talking about, these experiences of violence, how do people overcome these experiences to think of peaceful spaces, but spaces where they can actually live together and have a future together as well?
Thank you, Lucy. I think for us in PACSA, the start of this imagination that I talk about has its roots in the fact that there are tensions within communities. So we're not denying that there are tensions. There are also perceptions, and there are also the reality or the narrative of the other, which is being propagated and so on. But at the same time as that reality exists, there is also the reality of people living to some extent as neighbors, because we're in the very same community. And so to reimagine needs to begin with something that is positive, rather than the perceptions and so on. So some of the work we've been doing is to say, we are neighbors, and because we are neighbors, we all belong here. And because we all belong here, we have all contributed, one way or another, to what is good in this community. It might be a memory of the past, which we try and relive. And how can we continue to be neighbors to move beyond situations of that which divides us? So to give an example, in one community, there are people who had lived side by side with each other, even intermarriages between local and immigrant. And so to begin to tell that story of living together, of husband and wife, of families being created, and the positive nature of that experience. And that, I believe, is what people want to hold on to. And it's that which people need in order to be able to also fight against the other narratives that gets bombarded at you all the time. That it is possible to live as neighbors. It is possible because we have done so. And so to resurface that as some form of imagination.
Thank you very much. I would like to move to, because I think you were giving us, as Barbara said, a very vivid description of a different form of violence that immigrants are experiencing, which is not this direct physical violence, not the threat, not the being shot at, although of course it does also happen here. You know, asylum homes get burnt, for instance. But you were describing what I would call the structural violence of legislation and of administration. You know, on the one hand you were showing what an illusion it is, or to pick up, after all, on the title of the panel, what a pretense it is that the Swiss say this is a rule of law, because obviously the law is changing every 10 minutes, depending on how the political wind is blowing. So there is no such thing as a stable and predictable rule of law. But what happens in practice is that people, asylum seekers, immigrants, they get objectified. They get turned, they get quite literally broken down into files, into objects of sort of technocratic procedures. And I have a provocative question to you. What would happen if Switzerland would wake up one morning and decide to abolish all legislation and all procedures that regulate and control immigration? If it would open up the borders, but also abolish all the controls, the police controls that you were describing, what would happen then? Would this be utopia?
Thank you, Lucy. First of all, what I see is, maybe I'm dreaming. It's a dream. But when we talk about regularization or opening up the borders, it's just to accept humanity more than ethnicity. And that is to give protection for those who need it. Yeah. I cannot say, or I will not say that if the borders are opened, the population of Switzerland won't be 60 million in an overnight. No. It doesn't. That doesn't count. What is exactly happening is, for me, opening up the borders is not a solution. I've earlier said that the solution is not here. And it's partly here and partly in some other place. The best solution will be just scrutinizing what the Swiss government and other governments say, developmental aid. That is a foreign currency source that buys weapons and other things, and that will strengthen the dictators overall the world. If we can democratize the other side of the world? I don't think so. Because I have seen a lot of people moving from Switzerland to different countries in the 90s, in the 80s. Why not now? Rather than people coming to Switzerland. As I told you earlier, what asylum seekers need is a short-term protection till the rain stops. That doesn't mean they are here to stay generation after generation. That's my vision if the borders are closed. Now, not here in Switzerland, they are closed at the Mediterranean Sea. Europa is closed at Mediterranean Sea. That's why we are seeing another flood through the Central European countries. But if the problems are solved and if the Mediterranean is closed, people will not go the other way around. Somebody told me the American plows are more dangerous than the American weapons.
Thank you very much. Well, I have too many things to say. No, I would like to pick up on actually Angela Merkel's imaginary or imagination, because I also think it is quite outstanding the way that she has pushed back against this nearly this reflex of fear against immigration. And what she has done from quite a powerful position is that she's actually sketched out a different vision, a different imagination. Germany as a space of inclusion and not one of exclusion. Germany as a space of tolerance and not one of fear. And that is in itself very, very remarkable, I must say. But what is interesting here is that she also makes a very strong economic case for including and welcoming migrants or immigrants, because of course the German population is getting older and older, and they need a workforce, skilled workforce and a productive workforce. And she puts that case very strongly, and I do think there is an elephant in the room here, and I would like Jean-Pierre to address it, because what has come out, I think, quite clearly from today's talk is that xenophobia also, not only, but also has its roots in socio-economic realities. Deprivation and poverty and the experience of that, of course, fuels xenophobia, and it is obvious why it would do that. And in the case of South Africa, obviously the government and the very constitution, indeed, of South Africa fuels huge expectations. And you were critiquing this. You were saying what has happened, and I'll put it very provocatively, but what has happened is that South Africans lean back and expect the government to provide them with everything. And I would like to ask you about this elephant in the room, and that is the economy. Because obviously we were talking at lunch, you were saying the tax base is shrinking in South Africa, economic growth is stagnating. You know, what is the government to do? Where do you see the solution there?
Yeah, it is true that the economic situation in the country is not good at the moment. And to be honest, I'm not an economist, but you clearly said the leadership does not have clear solutions on how to deal with it. The mining sector, which is the most, the biggest economic contribution, whatever to the fiscus is having problems. Unemployment rate is very high, the population is increasing, and they just said the tax base is shrinking, is becoming smaller, and the people expecting free services from the government, it's going to be harder and harder every year for the smaller, the shrinking tax base to carry the majority of people who are not working, who, when you are not working, you have to depend to survive on something. I'm going to be very controversial here. Some of you have been in our countries, in Burundi, in Rwanda, very small countries, very poor countries when you look at national GDP and stuff. But if you look at the way people live, they don't live in poverty. Government don't have cash, they're poor, but people have something they survive on. And that thing is land. People don't go to supermarkets to buy what they're going to survive on. They go to supermarkets to buy what they can grow. They have almost everything. So the South African poverty is really felt because you need cash to be able to eat tonight, every single day. And that cash, you don't get it when you are not employed. And people haven't had jobs in many years. Graduates are not getting jobs, and the frustration is becoming so high. Now, there is this reality of deprivation, and there is these unmet expectations, and there is political scapegoating. Politicians are now trying to explain the failures. And in many cases, political leaders at different levels blame these failures on the presence of foreign nationals. And it becomes very easy for people to accept the message from their political leaders. And even if they don't tell them, go in the attack, but when they say, you're not getting medicine in your clinics because of foreign nationals, your kids are getting sick because of foreigners are coming with the diseases, you are not going to school, there's no space in the schools because of foreigners are here, the message is very clear. Do I have a solution? No. I'm glad I'm in the academia. We don't provide a solution. We just critique and sit down and give everybody a hard time for the solutions are not easy. But seriously, it's a big issue. We don't know if anybody has a problem. But really, there are talks about millions and millions of legal migrants or migrants in South Africa, but the census showed that it's only 4%. Not everybody was probably not counted, but it can't be. Some people talk about 10 million Zimbabweans living. Zimbabwe has a population of how many people? It's like 14 or 12 or 13. How can it be possible that 10 million Zimbabweans are in the country? Perceptions always brought about by political leaders and government officials who cannot explain how they are not able to fulfill their promises. I think the only thing I can say as a solution is that probably it's the setup, the whole democratic setup at the moment. I'm not the one to tell what to do, but when you see, for instance, that no one has an MP, there's a member of parliament, do not represent constituencies. There's no one coming from this area of Basel to articulate views from this particular space up in the National Assembly, so that views from the ground can be part of the policy-making processes. You just select for your party, and the party makes a list of MPs from anywhere they want, and that's it. So the frustration is very clear because they don't feel what they call participatory democracy is not really for them. It's like somebody, other people, not us. And violence has become one of the tools communities who are frustrated use to get government attention. And to be honest, they do. When they burn, when they stop things, imagine a parent stopping his kid to go to school to get the attention of the government. They do that. They say, kids, don't go to school. That's the only way we will get government attention because we are not getting any. They do that. They know it's their children's future, but say, look guys, you understand what you're trying to do. It's what you want to do. It happens. So violence is not only about foreign nationals, it's also about other frustrations, other issues that need to be taken. So for me, it's all about revising the whole governance system. I know it's very heavy, it doesn't make sense, but more normative, moral, legal, whatever governance is very key, and here has to take into account people's frustrations. One quick example, now I'll stop talking. There are meetings before xenophobic violence happens. And people voice their concerns, they say, foreigners are here, even if their views are not necessarily evidence-based. But you can feel in the eyes of the people that are genuine, they really feel something is happening. The response they get from the local leaders are like, what evidence do you have? They say, foreigners are criminals. The police say, bring evidence, come and testify. That's not a solution that diffuse tensions. And then people leave frustrated, okay, the police is not helping, local leadership is not helping, we have to help ourselves. I'm afraid I can't provide solutions.
As you say, your job is to raise questions, not to provide the answers. We've been talking about the economy, but then you moved on to politics, and I actually think that politics is, we've been talking about politics all day long, and what is interesting and also I think very worrying in all of this is that there is a sense that politics have failed, the state has failed. And I can use an example from Switzerland, which, like I say, I think one has to be quite cautious in comparing South Africa and Switzerland. You know, there are, of course, trends, but here in Switzerland, people were shocked, scandalized when this mass immigration initiative was actually accepted by a majority of the people. How can that happen? Well, it can happen because the majority who went to vote actually voted yes. And there is obviously also a failure of the political parties who opposed it because they, for some reason, didn't manage to mobilise their voters or to convince other voters to vote no. And I would actually like to ask all of you, but I would like to start with Sindi because you were the one who said it most directly. You said, you know, we have a real problem and we don't want to go and vote anymore, actually, because you know, no house, no land, no vote. But at the same time, it's very clear that the ANC and the government are really part of the problem, and you cannot solve the problem if they are not part of the solution in some way. And so my question is, you know, how do you engage with politics, and how do you engage with the state? You know, how do you put pressure on them through the violence? But you know, how it's, in a way, it's a conundrum. It's the solution is very, very difficult to see. And I was wondering how you deal with it, because you were saying that you had worked with the DA, I think. But I was wondering whether you could tell us a little more about how you are trying to kind of engage with the political system, or against it, as I think.
Lucy, it's difficult to engage with the political system. I can tell you that. We've tried so many times to engage with those people, doing the roundtable meetings, only to find out they will tell you that they're doing something. They're doing something. They're organizing meetings, they're doing some meetings within those around the people that are affected, and they going in the communities, of which they are lies. They talking lies. They not going inside those communities and seeing the situation and seeing those people who are involved in the attacks. So it is really difficult, as I said, that in South Africa to get involved in the political parties. It needs someone who knows that I'm going to go there and get involved in the political party because I've got 1, 2, and 3. If you don't have 1, 2, and 3, and you think that government is going to accept you and government is going to give you because you came and you accepted that you are the member of this political party, you're not going to get what you want. The corruption is the main issue in South Africa. So it is really, that is why we really said, as Abahlali, we are a non-political organization and we don't want to get involved in the politics at all. For us to get into politics, it's going to be like a damage. If you SANCO is one of the civil society in South Africa, the biggest civil society that Abahlali was formed. SANCO was there, existing already. But we don't see SANCO anyway because they are the alliance of the political party. And the people are suffering and SANCO is there. What SANCO is doing to help people? Nothing. Because they're getting the orders from the political party. If you're getting the orders from the political party, then it's difficult to work with the poor people. You have to take a stand, say, no, I'm on my own now. I'm not involved to anyone. So I'm going to deal with this on my own way. Otherwise, if you're getting involved there, then you're going to be remoted with the government. Government's going to remote you, and they're going to tell you what to do at what time. So I don't see, yes, I can say yes, we are still trying. We're not saying that our government can, but by, I think the only solution here is Abahlali. Abahlali got the support outside South Africa. There's a lot of the friends of Abahlali outside South Africa, in Germany, in London, UK. So if the voice from outside South Africa can become large than the people inside South Africa, and giving pressure to the government, telling government to speed up the process of what they so-called thing, they're saying that they're investigating. There is no investigation happening in South Africa against these xenophobic attacks. It's just that the word they're using as for the people to understand that they're working on this thing. So the voice from outside the country can be a tool that can be used to solve that solution in South Africa. For instance, when these attacks happening, the Nigerians came up with a statement saying that they're gonna bring Boko Haram in South Africa. They're gonna bomb the trains and all those things. Then the people started to get fear because they know what is Boko Haram and they really know what is going to happen if they saying that they're gonna bring a Boko Haram. So those kind of things was the first step to get them stop what they were doing. But little bit, they didn't stop at all. They were doing it overnight. They were doing it overnight now, trying to attack these people overnight. So for us, I really think we urge the people outside South Africa, all the continents, they must get involved and give the pressure to our government to get involved and do something. Otherwise, we are not going anywhere. It's going to be like stopping for a few months, then the next 5 months is starting again. So without our voice, without your voices, as the Abahlali are surviving, really surviving in South Africa because of the people outside from South Africa. We've got a large amount of people doing demonstration. If the Abahlali are marching and getting arrested and beaten up by the police, and the people stand up and say, no, it cannot happen to Abahlali. So that's the only thing that I can see as a solution for now. Otherwise, politicians, all the politicians are the same. All the politicians are the same. They can be an EFF here saying, no, I can make a change, only to find that EFF are the ones that say, no, the people must go, people must go. You find that there's all those kind of political parties, they all the same.
Thank you very much, Sindi. Mervyn, I was wondering, you actually responded to a question saying that you do not, or maybe only on a very, I mean, you have personal connections with somebody who is actually friendly to your cause. Now, is that just lucky? Would you be working with a municipality? How would you, I mean, because you don't seem to be working so much through, you know, with politicians either. Where do you see the solution?
How to say, I think, you know, in any kind of context such as South Africa today, I suppose anywhere else in the world, we have to be strategic. And I think the issue is about strategy. And if a particular political figure you can work with a particular political figure because there is some level of integrity, then of course we would do so. So when people say, well, would you work with government? Our standard response is, it depends. It depends on the issue. It depends on the receptivity of the issue. It depends on the level of integrity. And it depends also on personalities, in the sense that does this person have integrity or does this person not? In a way of leading us to a process, is it going to be a waste of time or not? So it depends. On the other hand, so that's as far as strategy. On the other hand, we see our role very much as building and supporting the emergence of other centers of power. So the political parties are centers of power, but doesn't have to be the only centers of power in a democracy or so. There can be other centers of power. And so we spend a lot of our time working with grassroots-based organizations, who works on the principle of democracy within that groups. We work with the principle of solidarity, and take a clear position against exclusion. And so we believe that these groups can become centers of power. And in cases where they are growing in their power, they get to a stage where they can begin to renegotiate with the political parties. And so an example would be, for instance, a group of people working around access to electricity, for instance. And their campaign has led them to get very large support within their particular community. And suddenly now the political parties are interested because they have power on the street. And because they have power on the street, they can negotiate a relationship with political parties. So that is another way in which we see imagining something different. Part of the difficulty, I think, in South Africa, dealing with the politicians, is that whilst we have a very nice constitution, written almost in a period of vacuum, at the end of the apartheid period and the KEESA process. And a period in which a number of activists, very well-meaning, very committed, tried to capture their hopes for the country in these documents. And so the documents speak very well about a democratic future. On the other hand, we have not transformed our state apparatus, which is still constructed along a neo-colonial model of operating. So patronage, extraction of wealth, and so on. And so you have the situation where you have this very nice constitution, and everybody says, well, South Africa, gee, you know, participatory democracy, human rights, and so on, this is fantastic. However, you need a state apparatus to put that into place. And that's often where the problem is. So, whilst we will work with individuals, it depends, we also see our role really as building other centres of power that can contest with the current centres of power, and we hope that perhaps out of that experiment we would be able to restructure or transform the state apparatus.
Thank you very much. Because I mean, the question really is, where does the political will come from? You know, where does the pressure come from on the state apparatus, but also on politicians? You know, that a different kind of politician comes out. But I would like to pass on to you as well. I mean, do you work? Because here too, there was a feeling that, you know, the left or people who were thinking more progressively had kind of failed in Switzerland. You know, they had obviously failed to capture the imagination of the voters. Do you work together with political parties, or, you know, where do you try and engage with voters, or, you know, try and kind of bring more attention to the issues that you are confronted with on a daily level?
Well, the situation of asylum seekers in Switzerland, it needs just a lot of attention by the Swiss people. And what we do is we try to come up and to discuss the issues with individuals, with groups. We open up, we organize some meetings so that the people can know what is exactly happening here. Our movement as the basis, we work with all groups when it is strategic. And we, at the group in the Autonome Schule, we have to be careful also, because sometimes some groups can influence the other groups, and then there will be a diversion of ideas, because we don't want to vote for a specific group unless and otherwise it can fight for the right of the asylum seekers here.
Thank you very much. So, I mean, what we've heard now is really the empowerment from the grassroots, or from the bottom up. I think all three of you are working very much in that area. And I was wondering, Jean-Pierre, you know, you were pointing out that there's also a systemic problem in the South African case now, the South African political system, that, for instance, members of parliament, you know, are not directly representative of the constituency that they are supposed to be representing. Now, we've been talking about strategy and strategic choices that you make, evaluations and interventions into, you know, the political system. And maybe from a slightly more removed vantage point that you have, would you identify any points where one should and could intervene into the political system to change it?
Yes, we don't, engagements, yes, but we don't go into those engagements with any specific agenda. Normally our engagements are about providing research evidence, clarifying things and trying to develop hypotheses and prove or disprove them. But we also work with advocacy groups and activists who want to push certain agenda to the government or political leaders. And what we do, we use our research evidence to give them some kind of evidence-based messages, because we believe that when you have powerful evidence, you can have a stronger advocacy message. One of the messages that was successful was around HIV treatment for foreign nationals living in the country. After the Mkhize era, denialism and stuff, South Africa started providing ARVs to people with HIV/AIDS, right? But migrants, international migrants, were not part of the process. We're not allowed to have that, okay? We don't have enough. This is only for citizens. And through research, one of our colleagues, talking with social organizations, we look, okay, that's fine, but don't present this issue as a foreign national issue. Make it a national issue. Say, for instance, if foreigners are HIV positive in this country, and they live in the communities. I hope you see where I'm going. Living in the communities means it means they will interact with the community members, citizens. And if there is no treatment, transmission is going to. So, not treating foreign nationals, giving ARVs to foreign nationals, is beyond foreign nationals themselves. It's going to affect local communities as well. From that moment, ARVs were given to foreign nationals. No question is asked. It's like, oh, this is about us. It's not about you. It's not about them anymore. It's us. It's about protecting us. So the message here is, what we try to do is really for people to think about the rules of engagement that can get government's attention or political leaders' attention. And those rules of engagement should stem from the understanding of their incentives. What they want. What do they get from a particular decision? How can we make them see that the decision for protecting this particular group is going somehow to save their political interest? Because let's be honest, it's all about political interest. So the message is, understand what makes these people tick, understand their incentives, and find a way for making messages that address those incentives. Look, if you do this, you're going to benefit from this kind of thing and this kind of strategy. The other key issue is about, we have seen examples where the national government or leadership is lethargic, is not working, but as you said, there are other nodes of governance, local level, powerful local level nodes of governance that see that this violence is affecting all of us. Discrimination is not helping us at all. And though we have seen instances where engagement in local leadership has had really interesting results in terms of social cohesion, in terms of inclusion, in terms of resolving issues before they engage into violence. So it's all about understanding incentives. It's all about formulating messages that go beyond it's a general group, it's a general issue, it's not just foreigners issue. So that's our role of engagement, to provide messages that can help advocacy groups to get stronger messages.
Thank you very much. I would actually like to open up the discussion. I don't want to monopolise all of this. And I think we do have some time as well. I'm looking at the organisers. So please, the floor is open. Oh, yes.
Violence is a means to obtain government attention, he said. Now, could it be, or to what extent could it be, that government is not even so unhappy about the violence because it gives them a possibility to react and to distract from other pressing problems such as economy, infrastructure, corruption, and the like?
I think this is part of what I was saying earlier about the lack of political will to address the issue, because it's not really seen as a pressing matter. Doesn't look like government has anything to lose by not addressing this issue. That's what it appears. In any way, it's when violence foreigners are being excluded, violence actually, government is siding with the perpetrators. Now, the new laws are being formulated to do what perpetrators want. Very soon we might see the refugee regime change in South Africa. It was local integration where you come to the country, they give you the paper, you live wherever you want in the country, you provide for yourself. But because of those pressures from the powerful groups, the community level, who don't want foreigners in their communities, government is proposing camps, refugee camps at the border. It's like, yeah, camps. So you see, government actually, it's okay, we understand your frustrations, we have to do something. It's about migrants are not seen as a political constituency for the politicians. They don't really matter in terms of the political reality. All what matters is their political base, and I think they would do anything to appeal so that can continue to be there. So I wouldn't go as far as to say government is happy when the foreigners are killed, but they are not bothered. But at least from what I see, from what I lack of response, lack of reaction, I don't think they are bothered by what's happening, because it's just people who are not politically interested. And that's why I'm saying if we want to get their attention, we have to find a way of making the violence not about foreign nationals. Now, one of the key issues we've been trying to say is you are allowing certain groups to take over the authority of the state. Today it might be foreign nationals, but tomorrow it might be another ethnic group. And tomorrow it could be the middle class. It's going to be another group. So try to frame it in a way that goes beyond just foreigners, because foreigners are not political power in the country. So one of those ways to get the government attention that goes beyond them.
Thank you.
Okay, I can add on what Jean has been said. Of course, government doesn't care, because the foreigners doesn't add on the votes in South Africa. They're just there. So, they think that they're spreading diseases and all that kind of things they're calling them. They don't have any input in their votes, in their political parties. So even if they can stay, not getting ARVs, that's a way of trying to decrease the number of them in the country. I think that was the strategy of decreasing the number of the refugees. And secondly, by doing this violence, attacking them, it's also the part of decreasing the number, because if you see, it's not like they're killing them and those people are stopping coming in. They're still coming in, although there is violence, because there is a problem where they come from. So they cannot stay if they know that there is a place where they can do something, or they can get something from. Yeah, that's what I can see this thing as. I don't know if you want to.
Perhaps just beyond the discussion on xenophobia, I think that was dealt with adequately. In terms of other areas of political life in South Africa, it is also the reality that the streets and the public spaces have become the theatre for negotiating our political issues. And often that end up in violence, sometimes violence perpetrated on the part of the police, who does not see their role as a protective measure, but rather as a measure of driving people away. And that has its roots in the reality that democracy, as practiced in South Africa, is actually not working. And so ordinary people are not experiencing and believing that they are being heard. And so the only way of dealing with that is actually to, rather than use the voting booth or organizational, structural processes for engagement, is in fact then to go onto the street. And so we are more and more calling the street as the theatre of politics.
Any further questions? Comments?
I wanted to bring up the issue of, well, if nationalism is the problem in xenophobia somehow, maybe there's a cosmopolitan solution to it. And so I think there have been one or two instances when it came up, like what you need from the UK people, solidarity with the Abahlali. But I would still want to ask all of you on the podium how you see that kind of like that cosmopolitan connection, and how we can counter nationalism on that level, and maybe also whether, sitting together with these people that are now on the podium and talking to us, whether that kind of adds something to activism and to the methods and whatever you use there. What have you learned from being exposed to the discussion on Switzerland, for example, the South Africans, and you from hearing about South Africa?
Yes, cosmopolitanism has been a buzzword for, a few years ago, but the idea was to transcend national borders. We belong to the cosmos. I don't belong to any nation. That was usually perceived as an elitist ideology by the rich who feel they belong everywhere, they can access rights everywhere, nation doesn't matter. But it actually has led, in some societies in which we live, it has led to the opposite. It has led to the more stronger, localized identities. And to be honest, for the poor, nation states still matter. That's where they derive their rights and privileges. That's why we can make demand. For instance, in South Africa, the poor who are struggling to get services, how can you bring in the idea of cosmopolitanism? Where the nation state is where they want rights from, they want services from. And to be fair, even those people who advocate for that ideology, that that new form of belonging, they know they derive the privileges and their parts from somewhere, from nation states. So, cosmopolitanism, of course, it is also experienced at street level and people want to belong, but nation state is still a very powerful reference point for many people. And I don't think it will be readily acceptable as a solution to the problems we face, because as we said yesterday, whether national borders exist or not, we will still have group identities, we will have groupings in our own communities and our own societies. And those groupings will come with structures, different power structures that have to be managed in some way to avoid conflict. So it's a good ideology on paper, but in practice, it's very difficult to practice when people are still looking up to the state for their rights and services and that kind of stuff. For the rich, maybe people have their own money, can get money from the ATM machine whenever they go, that's fine. But for somebody who wants something to survive on from the government, it's going to be very difficult to preach.
Well, as to me, what I learned from today's situation is, what happens in South Africa was a very sad situation, because before '94, everybody knows where South Africans were. But sometimes it's not sad. I see it in my own country. People are evicted from one region to the other region because they are the so-called ethnic federation as regional states. Though in South Africa, what we see is what we call them foreigners, or you and me. But in Ethiopia, what we have seen it in the last 5 years is just the nationals of the same country, the same citizens, they were evicted from their places in search of land to give 3 million hectares to multinationals. Then I will not be ridiculed, because South Africa, next to Ghana, is the safest place in Africa.
Thank you for your question. I mean, it's really interesting. This made me start thinking around new ways. Firstly, to start from the positive side, it's affirming to hear about the autonomous schools. It's affirming to know that grassroots democracy can work and does work. And what we are trying to do, there's an example of this. So thank you for that. And I think for me, suddenly, in response to your question, that is what is important. For those who are working, yes, so there's a similar experience globally around how migrants are being treated. In Switzerland, in South Africa, Perhaps in Switzerland there's not direct killing, in South Africa there is. But life is extremely, it's been made difficult. On the other hand, and so that's a global phenomenon. It is also true that it's a global phenomenon that people are struggling against it. And it's also a global phenomenon that there are people globally who believe in certain values. Dignity of human beings, inclusion, compassion, and those are global values. And so I think that we need both. We need to work at local levels. We need to build what I call repositories of power that can challenge other forms of power within the local state, and so those things are necessary. But I think international solidarity must always remain. I know that the nation state is still important and will continue to be important. I'm also hopeful that we haven't come to the end of humanity's capacity to construct political communities. Otherwise, we might as well close all the university research institutes and go home. I believe that it is in international solidarity and in sharing such as this that we can begin to see what is happening in other countries that could be transplanted into other places. And I would like to see that that the global community will play a greater role. And even if it is only for the sake of trying to stop multinationals. And because a lot of the problems in South Africa, yes, our economic base is shrinking. Yes, we have a tax issue. But if we calculate the amount of money that leaves South Africa illicitly through multinationals and gets deposited in safe havens, and some of them in Zürich, then we are talking about a very different economic situation in South Africa, where South Africa would actually have sufficient resources to provide the basic needs for all who live there. So we cannot just only work at one level. It is critically important that we work at both levels. But I go back really affirmed by your example of the autonomous schools, that democracy is possible at a grassroots level. We'll have to work out how we structure that into national and regional processes. But it's possible. Human beings have the capacity to think that through.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid we're slowly running out of time, and I think we've all had a very interesting, but also quite a long day. I've certainly learned a lot about spaces of violence, spaces of exclusion, but also about spaces of humanity, spaces of solidarity, spaces of resistance, and I think that is something that carries us all through. So on my behalf, thank you very much to all the speakers, to all the presenters. Thank you very much to all the audience participants. And I would like to hand over to Elisio for the closing of this event.